Is the Quiet Place series one of your favorites? How about a dash of Critters, minus the humor, of course? Oh, and a strong helping of Nick Cage. Arcadian. Arcadian from 2024 was directed by Benjamin Brewer, who is so far probably most known for his visual effects work on Everything Everywhere All at Once. I listed that because that was a very successful movie, but he's done some other stuff too. It was written by Mark Nyland, who is most known as a producer, so definitely an interesting creative team here. We've seen it before in other films. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And of course, we are still in the era of Nick Cage, which is what I coined it, and I love it. And I hope it never ends. We also have Jaeden Martell and Maxwell Jenkins as the other two leads. And I wasn't familiar with those two guys at all, but they are, they're young dudes, and I thought they did a really good job here. In fact, they probably have a bit more screen time than Cage does. The plot here is pretty simple, especially since we don't really have a ton to work with. Pretty straightforward movie. Also, I gotta say, just right here, right now, I'm probably going to be using The Quiet Place as a reference point pretty frequently in this video, since Arcadian is just so similar. I'm sure the creators of Arcadian would be pissed off to see that, but come on, man. And honestly, I see that as mostly detrimental. The film starts with Paul, played by Nick Cage, looking around a mostly destroyed city for supplies. And with him are two baby boys. Fast forward 15 years, and Paul and his now teenage boys, Joseph and Thomas, are living in an old farmhouse, surviving one day at a time. And I will say, so in the Red Letter Media video where they talked about this movie and Long Legs as well, I think it was Jay Bauman mentions that, so these two boys that Nick Cage has, Paul, are they his, or did he just find them and decide to raise them as his own? Because you will notice, and to be honest, I might not have caught that when I watched this, but you will notice as Paul is, doing his whatever you want to call it, what's the word I'm looking for? He's looking for stuff, scavenging for supplies. You will notice that he is looking around for stuff, and then he comes back to this other building, and he picks up the boys, and he's not carrying them with him as he's looking for supplies, which you would think in a dangerous world like that, you wouldn't set down two babies and then go look around. Fuck that. You wouldn't do that. So I kind of get the feeling that he finds them, but I could be wrong. But I think really you could go either way, but I think that he finds them and raises them as his own. But either way, that's not really a huge plot point here. So at night, groups of nocturnal, monstrous creatures roam around, attacking what little is, left at this point of humankind. We've got a tight 92-minute runtime here, so not much time is wasted on, how things went down, really. It's just kind of focused on the, here and now. You do get a brief explanation later on in the movie, and it's really not what I expected, and it does leave, of course, a ton of questions. And Paul and his boys they're a very tight-knit family. They have their ways of survival, and it's the best they can do with what little they have. During the day, they scavenge for supplies, by traveling as far as they can while still being able to make it home before dark. The creatures hunting them only come out at night, so the time Paul and the boys have, away from their house is pretty limited. I mean, it makes sense. I would think that staying put, for the most part, is far less risky than traveling, from place to place, trying to get somewhere far away. There seems to be no way to communicate with the outside world also. The only contacts they really have is another family relatively nearby, as in you can get there and then get back before dark. So I don't know how far that is, but it's not that far. And this family has a teen daughter, around the same age as Joseph and Thomas Thomas sneaks away during the day to visit her. And one day, while he's on his way home, he falls into an underground cave, and he's unable to get himself out. Paul ventures out to look for him, despite it nearing dark already at that point. So this is obviously a pretty dangerous mission, right? And I have to add, that as a single dad myself, I found this to be pretty touching, Paul risks not only his own life, but he risks Joseph's as well by leaving him home, by himself. And that isn't me criticizing his decision-making, because, I would have done the same thing. He ends up finding Thomas with the help of Rocco, you know, the family dog. Of course, the dog comes to the rescue as always. They fight off a group of creatures, but Paul is badly hurt, and Thomas has to, you know, Thomas is now in charge of getting his dad home by himself. Not an easy thing to do. And you really don't see a lot of Paul during the entire second act, leaving Joseph and Thomas to, you know, try and figure out what they're supposed to do here. And again, I did like the family aspect here. Nobody gives a particularly outstanding performance, but it's believable enough. And I liked how our three guys here will do anything for each other, even if it puts, you know, all of them at risk. And I felt invested in them enough because, you know, if I didn't, this whole thing just falls apart. I wanted to see them all make it through this together. I really did. Now I'll move on to the creatures, you know, that I've been talking about because they're such a big part of the story. And I do have, you know, definite mixed feelings about them. Now, clearly, I'm not a VFX guy, right? Visual effects, I don't know shit about that kind of thing. But they look like a combination of CGI and practical effects, which I'm totally fine with. You know, the close-up scenes look to be mostly practical, you know, giving this a bit of an 80s creature feature vibe, which I much appreciated. And when CGI was used, it was used very well, which is a common complaint for me when it isn't. I am a fan, you know, a minor fan of the Quiet Place series, but I always kind of hate how the aliens are they, at least to me, they look 100% CGI. And I think they look all right, but too much CGI in my opinion. So my only real complaint with the Arcadian monsters is when they do this thing where they like snap their jaws, they open and close their jaws really fast. I would have completely eliminated that. It doesn't really make any sense. I think it looks kind of stupid. However, they don't do it all the time. They do it a lot. I would definitely have changed that if I could, but it's still a pretty minor complaint. The overall design of these monsters is pretty cool, which is no surprise since our director here is also a VFX guy. Almost everything I've said so far has been, I think we'd agree, fairly positive. So now we'll get to the negatives. And honestly, I don't really have that much bad to say about this. I think my main complaint was that I would have preferred just a bit more explanation on, you know, how the world collapsed and where the creatures came from. I feel like Mike Nyland and Benjamin Brewer, you know, have just got to be huge fans of the Quiet Place series. So much that the comparison is just unavoidable. But it's just a bit too similar, and in my opinion, that kind of hurts Arcadian. Ultimately, I think the things that you will, you know, take away from this is the cool, although slightly flawed creature design and the family dynamic between the three leads. It's like a lower budget, less bombastic version of The Quiet Place, which is okay. It does work. There is a somber atmosphere that surrounds the entire runtime with the help of a very emotional sounding score, and it is all sad and a bit depressing overall, I would say. And when I watch a movie now for the very first time, I always think to myself, did this really need to exist? Would I watch this again? Will people remember this? These are questions that I ask. So I'm giving Arcadian a 6 out of 10. I think it's as good as it could have been, despite a fairly low budget and sort of lack of originality. And I would totally recommend it to fans of post-apocalyptic films, especially if you love the Quiet Place series. I know I mentioned that a lot in this review, and that should tell you a lot. But I liked it. Cheers, guys.